Have you ever been playing Left 4 Dead and come across something you can't quite explain? From weird, unexplainable scenes to bizarre oddities, in this video I'll be exploring some of Left 4 Dead's unsolved mysteries. But before we get into that, if we hit 1,000 likes on today's video, I'll post some baby bunny pictures on my community tab. I also have a public Discord that anyone is welcome to join. Thank you guys so much for supporting me, but without further ado, let's jump into Left 4 Dead 2's unsolved mysteries. If you've ever played the map Swamp Fever, you'll have most likely come across this hanging charger right before you cross the nearby river. There's a few details about this charger that make it a mystery. First is the most obvious question: why would anyone go through the effort of hanging up a charger? Second, was this individual tied up before he turned or after? And lastly, what was the message whoever put this here was trying to convey? Let's try and answer some of those questions. If we take a look at the charger's right arm, you can see that whoever tied him up here used more rope to tie this arm because it's bigger. So this shows that this individual would have had to turn into a charger prior to being tied up. If you look directly beneath the charger, on the ground lies a pool of blood. Not the craziest detail, but what that does tell me is that the charger was killed very close to the time it was tied up. Because if it had already been sitting around for days or weeks, most of its blood would have already dissipated. There's a few fan theories as to why I believe the people of this town would have tied up this charger. The first reason is that they tied him up as a trophy, signifying their ability to take one down, and potentially scaring off other survivors from messing with them, like a show of strength basically. Another theory is that the people of this town tied up the individual before he turned to try and restrain him, possibly to see if they could try and cure him. But like I mentioned earlier, the extra rope kind of opposes this theory, and why would they put him in such a manner? Why wouldn't they tie him up behind a house or something? If we step out of the universe for a second, I saw somewhere online that it could be a reference to Half-Life because the charger is in the rough shape of a lambda, but in all honesty, I don't really see it. If you try and shoot the charger, your bullets will pass right through him. However, if you shoot the wooden post he's tied to, your bullets will actually hit that. Nothing crazy, but something I wanted to point out. Maybe it's an Easter egg. Maybe the people of this town did something sinister. But unfortunately, with the lack of concrete evidence, we can only speculate on the reason this charger remains tied up. The next one isn't too crazy, so I'll try to keep it short. When you play through the Dead Center campaign, there's this part where you come to a gun store. Right as you enter the gun store, a man begins talking to our survivors over the intercom. He says you're welcome to take anything you need, and he'll clear the path ahead if you run into the store and grab him some cola.
If you give me my cola, I'll get you to the mall.
So let me get this straight. We get you your shit, and you'll help us get to the mall, right? Okay. You screw us, and I will kill you with your own gun.
On my word as a gentleman, I will do no screwing, sir.
With no other options, that's what our survivors do, bringing the cola back to the gun store and slipping it through an opening in the door. What makes this entire exchange interesting is the fact that our survivors don't typically speak to a lot of alive people. Other than people in evacuation sites and external media, there's only a handful of people you can get into contact with. So I wanted to pose the question: what happens to the gun store owner? Well, there's no real answer. Our survivors continue into the mall and eventually leave with Jimmy Gibbs' car, and we never see him again. The hopeful theory is that with the access to all his guns and ammo, he's able to defend himself long enough to live a peaceful life or even escape the area if he needs. He seemed pretty happy with the cola, so I wouldn't be too shocked if that's all he wanted in life. Here's an interesting detail. If you use console commands to get the right angle, you can see him for a split second as he fires the rocket. His model uses the fallen survivor texture, and he sort of just appears and then disappears as the door opens and closes. It's possible he contracted the green flu from our group of survivors, but they don't come into physical contact with him, so he might end up being safe. Another possibility is that he's a carrier. Think about it. The entire area around him is completely infected. Anyone in the vicinity would most likely contract the green flu, so that further proves he might be immune. Although we can speculate on the eventual fate of our cola drinking friend, his true fate remains unsolved. As I was writing the previous section, I started thinking of Death Toll. For those of you who might have forgotten, you meet a person halfway through Death Toll's campaign, inside the church's safe room. Now, the fate of this man isn't necessarily a question because you eventually kill him, but what is a mystery are some of the events leading up to that point. You see, when the player enters the church, you can hear a man on the other side of the safe room door.
Is someone there? I've got a bell in here. I'm gonna start ringing this church bell if you don't say something.
I can't believe he bit me. I never should have let him in. I can't believe he bit me.
I can hear you out there.
I never should have let him in. I can't believe he bit me. Don't get fooled twice.
Better safe than sorry. Better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry. Better safe than sorry.
If you decide not to try and open the door, you can listen to what he says. He repeats the phrase, better safe than sorry, over and over, and can even scream that he can hear you. Amongst some of his ramblings, you can begin to piece together his story. One of the other things he can say is, I thought you told me you were immune, and you bit me. He also says, it's been an hour, I should be immune. On the walls near the safe room door, you can see just how many people passed through here. There's probably 50 different stories on this wall alone. Once the survivors try to open the door, the man on the other side rings the church bell in an attempt to get rid of you. Once you clear out the waves of zombies, you finally open the door. However, something terrible has happened. The man that was once tweaking has turned into a random special infected.
Better safe than sorry. Better safe than sorry. Better safe than...
With no other choice, you gun him down. You can see on the inside that he wrote the phrase he was muttering earlier, better safe than sorry, all over the walls. By gathering all the details, this is my best guess as to what happened. An hour before our survivors arrive at the church, the man inside lets another individual or group of survivors in. The person or group probably enters with a bite or some kind of infection. In an effort to calm the guy in the church, they tell him they're immune, but this ends up being a lie. The individual or group turns and then bites the man in the church. Fast forward a little is when our group of survivors come into contact with the church, and you know what happens after that. There are slight adjustments you can make to this story using the given information, but this is my best guess. However, I still have a couple questions. Why did the man stay in the church for so long? Was he helping the people who passed through here? Did he live here? Was he the first person to make a living here, or did he raid it from someone? I do know that he has been living in this room for at least a little while because there's sleeping bags and food on the ground, but some of these questions might not ever get answers. Was this man righteous, or did he get what was coming to him? Now, this section might sound crazy, but give me a chance to explain. The story of the Death Toll sewer monster is a personal one. When I first started playing Left 4 Dead, it was on the 360, and this was Left 4 Dead 1 of course. Not only was I young, but at that age I had a crazy imagination. But I remember playing in the sewers of Death Toll like I always did. But one day I saw something out of the corner of my eye, something I called the Death Toll sewer monster. It scared me because I'd always played on easy. I was a bit of a wimp, so I thought I might have loaded up on the wrong difficulty, and maybe that difficulty had newer enemies. When I think back on what I thought it looked like, as a kid I pictured it similar to the Mudmen, with elongated arms and legs, with a broken jaw that would hang down. Now, it couldn't actually be a Mudman because if you remember, at the time they weren't in Left 4 Dead 1. They were added later in the second game. It was always out of reach, always out of sight. I would see it out of the corner of my eye and begin shooting it, but by the time I turned my head there would be nothing. What I think happened was that I probably watched a YouTube video and began imagining things. It's funny because I'd almost forgotten this story until I began writing this script and making the thumbnail. With mods on YouTube, I wouldn't be surprised if I just watched some wacky mod and then started thinking it was actually in the game. My dad is the one who introduced me to the game, so I would always talk to him about it. He would always brush me off because of course there's no sewer monster in Left 4 Dead. This is getting into creepypasta territory, but with the knowledge I know now, I can confirm there is no sewer monster in Death Toll's sewers. Or is there? Many of you might know that Valve issued a Left 4 Dead comic series to explain the ending of the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors. Unfortunately, they never got around to making a comic for the Left 4 Dead 2 survivors, so their true ending is a mystery, upon which we can only speculate, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do. The last campaign our second group of survivors make their way to is the Parish. A lot of people who watch this channel are already familiar with the history of this campaign, but let me explain it for those who might have forgotten or just don't know. During the entirety of the Parish campaign, the military plays a huge role, constantly bombing the city, and from the environment we can see that they began shooting people. Piles of dead bodies lay outside city evacuation sites. As to why exactly they were shot is a mystery within itself, but by reading the signs posted across the map, we know the military wasn't playing around. At the specific time that our group of survivors arrive in the Parish, the evacuation sites have all been overrun, but they decide to make an effort to head towards the military nonetheless. Throughout the entire campaign, the cast of characters slowly begin to realize what's happening, with Nick being the most vocal against the military. Crashed helicopters, dead bodies in safe rooms, weird signage are only a couple of things that they notice. They eventually make their way to a bridge and contact the military over a walkie-talkie they find on a dead dude. What the men over the walkie-talkie says is very important, and pay attention to it. The people over the radio ask if our survivors are immune. The survivors respond with yes. The survivors seemingly don't really react too much, but give some snarky remark. Then one man asks the chopper if he's prepped for carriers. The pilot says yes, and our group goes on their way. After they battle their way through the bridge, they spot the chopper and hop on right before the bridge blows up. And that's the last we ever see of the Left 4 Dead 2 survivors. If we go back to the conversation they had with the military, we can tell that they knew what carriers were, whilst our survivors seem to not understand that word.
On the west end of the bridge.
Bridge, are you immune?
We are not infected.
Negative, Bridge. Are you immune? Have you encountered the infected?
Yeah, you could say that.
Rescue 7, are you equipped for carriers? Affirmative, propagator.
Given the context clues found all throughout the campaign, our survivors probably end up in a military installation behind bars, or at least in containment, because if the military has a protocol and preparation for carriers, they most likely have somewhere to store said carriers. The sad approach is that they all get shot, but I don't believe this theory, because why would the military go through the effort of waiting for them and pausing the bombing run? They could have just killed them on the bridge or just left. What I think is more realistic is that they brought them to a testing installation to try and figure out a cure. Now we can argue the logistics of actually being able to make a cure, but as we see in the Left 4 Dead 1 comics, it's something that they're trying to do. Sadly, without any comics or a third game, the true fate of the Left 4 Dead 2 survivors might remain a mystery forever. Left 4 Dead 2 has a lot of maps. Hard Rain is one of them. I would say it's kind of forgotten about a lot of the time. I have a love-hate relationship with this campaign because I love to play it on expert mode, but it's so challenging. And one of the things I've always wondered about this campaign is, why are there so many witches? As you get farther into the campaign, the later maps will have a ton of witches scattered throughout them, especially in and around the sugar mill. But why? Is there an in-universe explanation, or was it just a gimmick the game devs wanted to add? Let's take a look at how the witches spawn throughout the entire game. They seem to be placed randomly. Sometimes they're sitting, or sometimes they're walking around. There doesn't seem to be any real strategy to their placements. But then you look at Hard Rain, and all of a sudden that formula has changed. What's the big deal? Well, when I first began writing the reason for this theory, the most obvious option at the time was the rain. Maybe the rain attracts the witches somehow. We know that by playing the game, the witches are always sad, they're always crying. Maybe somehow the rain comforts them. By the time the survivors make it to the sugar mill, it's already raining. Not insanely hard or anything, but enough to attract the witches. And there's a ton of them. The survivors don't really comment on the weirdness of it. They can call out the witches and that there's a lot of them, but beyond that, they don't really talk too much about it. After searching through some Reddit posts, people claim that the witches are attracted to sugar, and not so much the rain. This would explain why they're so densely populated in and around the sugar mill. However, there's a problem that I have with this theory. I never see any witches eating or handling refined sugar. You could argue that they're more attracted to the smell, which is possible, but to that I'd say if they care enough about the smell, wouldn't they just want to eat the sugar itself? Maybe their zombie-like state prohibits them from actually consuming the sugar, but the smell isn't enough to attract them. Whatever the case is, watch your back the next time you play Hard Rain. The true reason as to why there's so many witches might be solved, but with the lack of concrete evidence, I feel as if it's a borderline mystery. Even if the sugar attracts them, why does it seem to just stop at that? Something mysterious to think about. If you've watched some of my content in the past, you will already know I'm no stranger to the green flu virus. And while the green flu is literally everywhere in the form of the infected, surprisingly not much is known about its origin. Let's say you wanted to go out and find the origin of the infection. Which game would you look at? Is it even possible? Honestly, I had no idea until I looked it up on the Left 4 Dead wiki. According to the wiki, a possible candidate for Patient Zero resides behind glass in a secure room in No Mercy Hospital. If you inspect this room, you can see that there is indeed an infected on the ground and some interesting signage outside the door, but there's not a whole lot else. In past theories, I speculated that the origin of the green flu comes from military weapon testing. Ellis even has stories of the military doing weapon testing near where he used to live. The wiki does support this thought experiment. It's possible that the military was doing biochemical weapon experiments, and during one of these tests, someone got infected. The military usually does these experiments in secluded areas where no one lives, which is strange because like I mentioned earlier, Ellis seems to know something about it. I could be misremembering his story, but that's what I found through research. Someone probably wandered into some area where the military was testing, and that's how they contracted the virus. That person was then picked up and brought to the Mercy Hospital, where we see them on the ground today. If we look back at the Sacrifice comic, one of the scientists mentioned finding a cure is nearly impossible, that he can't even pin it down. It constantly mutates, which is what makes researching the cure so hard. Think about making a virus for a second. Assuming we have the technology, let's put ourselves in the military's shoes. What would you want a virus to do? Well, if you plan to drop it on another country, you wouldn't want them to make a cure, because if a cure can be easily made, then the virus becomes ineffective. You would want the virus to mutate rapidly to completely nullify the possibility of any cure. And that's exactly what we see with the green flu. While it's interesting to speculate and come to these conclusions, there's no concrete evidence to prove that it comes from a weapon. The only reason we know as much is because of a few throwaway lines from a person whose trust is questionable at best. At the end of the day, the origin might not even matter. With how fast the green flu spreads, I wouldn't be surprised if the whole world becomes infected faster than we could even find out where it came from. The true origin of the green flu might remain an unsolved mystery forever. Many of these unsolved mysteries could easily be solved by a third installment in the franchise. I wouldn't hold out hope forever, as it seems Valve can only count to the number 2. Please remember to join the public Discord server, and again, if we hit 1,000 likes, I'll post some baby bunny pictures on my community tab. So make sure you subscribe and you'll see them on your feed. Tell somebody you love them, be nice, and have a nice rest of your day. Peace out.